these are all essential things for digital freedoms going forwards. And just having people out there saying, "Oh, all this other technology is shit," it's ignorant and it's dangerous, in my opinion. It's bad for the scene and it's bad for them as well. And so Saylor needs to appreciate, right? If you have a token where the founders of that token gave themselves tokens and then also actively distributed the token from their accounts, that's a security. If the founders had a founding stake that they left for themselves, that's a weak point, it's a security. If there's a company that can be approached and sued, it's a weak point, it's a security. If there's venture capital in the project prior to the project being released, they don't have the same alignments as the community and they are actively dumping on the community. That is a centralized shitcoin. It's not true decentralization. But basically, pre-seeds, anything to do with like raising money, money has to be raised decentralized. The project has to be built open source and free and given away. And if that means that the developers who build the project have to develop it for free without raising any funds from anywhere and doing their own time, so be it. If they can get the funds to build the work without any strings attached, also that's good. If they can get the funding from a DAO that's voted on by a decentralized community, also good. If they have to get the funding from a venture capitalist, if they have to get the funding from a bank or a loan, it's bad. It's not decentralized. And so if you look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin was built this way. Bitcoin, it was an idea, it was a white paper, and the community came together and they built the technology for free, right? All of these other projects didn't do that. They all had to raise ICOs and then put the money in their pockets, right? So yeah, ICO is going to exclude you, but that doesn't mean that every single project was ICO'd. It doesn't mean that every single project has a CEO. It doesn't mean that every single project has a company, right? But he's assuming that it does, and this is where it gets frustrating, because it's like, just because Bitcoin doesn't have it doesn't mean there aren't other projects out there that don't have the same principles and the same criteria, right? There are other projects out there, such as Hive and Speak Network, that are not securities and they have not been issued as such. They don't have like a core team of devs that's running under a company that can make changes to the code without the community coming together and voting and running the new code. So there needs to be a check here. It's like, hold on a minute, you can't just say that shit without people coming back and questioning you. You have to respond to these questions, because you can't just say that stuff. It's wrong. It's flat out wrong. And you know it, Michael. You know it's wrong. It's like, what are you doing? You know?
Yeah, it's just, I can understand, hey, it might be a little bit tough to comprehend in terms of, okay, there was no founder, there's no centralized stake. How does this thing get, how did it pick itself up by its bootstraps? What's funding it? And these are just the fundamental questions you have to ask. You have to look at it and say, all right, the first principles I look at is a coin voting. Okay, does it have delegation? If it doesn't, then that's a red flag. I would go to delegation route. From there, look at how it was
Why would you do
originated. How
that, Dan?
much?
Just for people that are new to this, why would you go for the delegation rather than the staking side?
One of his biggest arguments is proof of stake, rich get richer. You don't have to constantly compromise resources to stay in the game, aka the Red Queen game that Bitcoin is. And yeah, there's a lot of merit there. But I've always pointed to this real life fact. I'm a top three, top four holder in Hive, right? Well, if that was proof of stake, that means I'd be fourth or fifth in delegation in the rankings of validators. Well, on Hive, I'm not even in the top 20. We're not in the top 20 combined with Starkers. So keep that in mind. That delegated proof of stake isn't he who has the most coins rules. It's he who has the best reputation. He who's been here the longest. He who has put enough respect and earned enough rankings to be there. It's a very slow process. And yeah, we've gradually grown closer. We were 60th, 50th. And you can see as you do things, as people realize all the contributions, you slowly go up the rank, as it should be. And it's a natural, organic way to have validators. With proof of stake, there's another very important reason Bitcoin suffers from this. Any entity that doesn't parameter enough, I guess you could say honchos, right? 20 people who are in charge in delegated proof of stake on Hive, which means 17 plus 1 have to agree before anything is pushed through. Well, if you don't have that, then you have the problem of, hey, who do we listen to? And
Who's the most popular, right?
There's always going to be one person out there with a prettier smile, that talks better, that's done more work, that is more respected than anyone else. And everyone, when it comes to push the button, are going to say, what does this guy say? What does this person say? I'm going with them. And it's the herd mentality
Exactly.
that you need to protect the market from itself.
The key difference on delegated proof of stake here is that because 20 people, or whatever you end up programming into the protocol, it might be 40 people, it might be 60 people, whatever you end up putting in, because those people are of equal, they've got equal say. So even like the most popular person on chain has got the same weighted say in what happens as the 20th most popular person on DPoS, right? So it means you actually have to have a consensus of people who aren't necessarily the most popular people, but they're all up there somewhere and they all have an equal say. Whereas what you're saying, Dan, is on things like Bitcoin, it becomes like a he who shouts loudest. He who shouts loudest has the best smile and the most charming argument will get the people to stand behind him, and that is not necessarily the most optimum way forwards in decentralization because of the corruptible entity there, right? It's a centralized mentality because you've got this one person that's really popular on top, and you can argue there's a few different devs. Certainly in proof of stake, it will be like that, right?
I think of some analogy real quick. It's almost like, okay, you have a team, you have Michael Jordan, right? He's better than everybody. But if he was out there alone, he wouldn't, he'd get slaughtered. He still has to work with his teammates. So delegated proof of stake is, yeah, you might have Michael Jordan, but he's not out there alone. Because any person that's out there alone, no matter what, is going to have a blind spot. And it becomes political. And, if you speak up against this person, you get ousted and all of these things. Well, a delegated proof of stake, it's not that way. It's more of it's a blob effect. Well, you might say the most popular person might say something, and then 5 or 6 people might rise up who matter, who you have to respect. You can't just say, "Oh, peasant, get away from me. You don't matter. Everyone's going to listen to me." You have to sway. It's like a business. You have to sway these people. It's, oh man, all right, yeah, let's sit down. Let's go to the drawing board. What holes did you find? And eventually, the smartest person in the room is going to find a blind spot, and they're going to become smarter. And the only way to become smarter is to be attacked, basically, to be able to defend your opinion. And we see that with Hive. It's very, very political when it comes up. But there's things that are no brainers, but there's things that take 4, 5 years to implement. On and off debate, and that's how it should be. And you don't get that if you have an Adam Back, or who Adam Back says, hey, he listens to a guy. It's like, okay, are you going to go against the guy that Adam Back listens to? It's like, I don't think I will, but I don't feel right if he's the shot caller. I'd rather have at least 19 other guys fact checking this guy because they're forced to. It's their job. They have to fact check.
Exactly. And this is the other thing. So on proof of stake, a centralizing founder stake, if it gets commandeered, it's effectively the same thing as what you're saying, where an Adam Back, for example, might get the voice of the community behind him because they support what he's saying, even though he might be wrong or he might be corrupted. They've got no way of telling that. A delegated proof of stake is a counterbalance to that because it forces the top 20 to act and make decisions amongst each other. And then the other thing here is on a proof of stake, you've got the biggest stake will have that effect. They'll be the kingpin decider and many things. Whereas with delegated proof of stake, because you have to be elected in by the community, you're accountable to the community, and it's a proof of stake where you're delegating your stake to 20, well, actually 30 people in the top 20 get to run the blockchain. But then it's like, as long as you don't have that founder's supply, as long as you don't have a CEO, as long as you don't have a pre-mine and a pre-seed, as long as you don't have a company then or any venture capital on DPoS, and you have a true long-term distribution mechanism, which is the case on Hive, then you don't have any centralized entity that can be called up and called a dev team that's constantly changing the protocol. Or you don't have anyone that can be called up, that the SEC can call up to say, right, you're a security, we're shutting you down, or we're regulating you, right? And these are key things. These are key flaws in the arguments that Michael Saylor's making. And I want to be very clear that it's not on, in my opinion, that these people can make these types of statements and not be challenged. Because it's bad for the ecosystem. It's certainly not great for DPoS, and it seems, give the benefit of the doubt, these guys may be ignorant to these facts, but we've been through this. We've been through the trenches. We've been through the wars. We've been through takeovers from the likes of Justin Sun. We've won them, right? And now you're telling me that we're a security? Are you kidding me? what we've been through is far, far, far worse than almost any chain out there, if not all of them. Probably even as bad as what Bitcoin went through with the takeover with the BIP back in 2017 or 16. It's like we fought these guys and won because we're decentralized, because it's a decentralized system. And when I say we, I don't mean we like there's some entity here. There is no entity. There's no company. There's no money. There's no founding fund or anything. There's nothing here. It's a truly decentralized system, and it works just as well as Bitcoin does in terms of security and defense.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I'm seeing is they're trying to chase perfection on paper, and you can make anything sound perfect in theory and then say, well, just give it time and let's see what happens, which is the case of what he does with Bitcoin. The whole, never fork, everything's perfect here. It's always going to be the same. That's not how these things work. There's going to be some risk. There's going to be some evolution. There's going to be some curation needed. You're going to constantly have to upkeep this thing. But there's
definitely a risk there on Bitcoin. Satoshi's coins are a risk.
Well, yeah,
there is the only reason they can sleep at night is because he's never moved the coins. But when they start moving the coins, you watch them sleep. They won't.
Well, but eventually you're going to need $1,000 fees on Bitcoin minimum once the emissions run out, or you're not going to have enough incentivization to secure the chain. If you don't have enough incentivization, one thing's going to happen. Big tech will make sure the transactions go through, and then you have a layer 2 that's built to be centralized. So Bitcoin has a lot of evolution to do. Like, I'm not saying it can't happen, but right now the foundation is set for centralization in the future. If you're talking about the common person, which is 99% of the population, not going to be able to afford those fees. So to think that, we need to shy away from evolving. Forking's bad. Voting is bad. It's bad if you paint it bad. If you say, if you have a founder with an ICO and a pre-mine, then of course voting's bad. It'd be the equivalent of being able to do that with hash rate. I have an ICO on hash rate, and I'm going to keep 70% of the hash rate. It's like, okay, well, now I clearly understand why that's bad in Bitcoin terms. You wouldn't want that. It's the same thing with coin voting, but if you can eliminate that and you make sure that the coins aren't going to a small group of people, aka validators only, then you actually have something. Start with, a zero pre-mine, a zero centralizing amount of tokens, distribute them far and wide in a clever way, which proof of brain is a very clever way. There's other ways to do it as well. Then you really have the start of something. And if things get bad, this thing grows wings, and there's enough people who say, hey, we're going to fork, we can handle our own. And that's fluidness. That's what's going to happen with Web3. You're going to have these challenges, these ebbs and flows. There's, who knows, there might be forks in the future. I think that's a superpower. I think if you have enough of a squeeze, then it's merited. I'm talking about a fork out of defense, not a fork out of upgrading and being proactive. So there's a lot of merit to coin voting. Bitcoin does very little in terms of Web3, own your account, store, all the things that you've mentioned. It does, a really good job of being a store of value. I believe it's a very big improvement over the Swift system. I think there's other things you can do with it, but as far as creating, things like algo coins, communities where communities can create their own tokens with their own inflation, with their own value creation mechanisms, these things matter and they can't be centralized. So you have to kind of get off your high horse and be willing to work with what you got. I'm somebody who says, okay, let's work with what we got. What's the best way to do this? If you're going to do it, people are like, oh, it's stupid. That's impossible, blah, blah, blah. I say, hey, humor me. What's the best way to do it? Well, if you were going to do it, you need to have a coin voting system without any pre-mine, no inflation, no centralized amount of tokens. Yep. You'd have to have a good way to distribute the tokens, yada, yada, yada. And then you would get to a point as Hive. And sure, you can poke at it and you can say, oh, this could happen, that could happen. It's not Bitcoin. And you can be afraid and live in your little bubble, or you can be willing to step up and experiment and say, hey, maybe this thing could do something. They have the right, path in mind. They have the right philosophy. Maybe if we encourage it instead of constantly attacking it, what would happen? So.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. And the other thing here as well is all the ingredients you just mentioned, like you have to monitor them as you go. The community has to monitor them. They're ingredients, but the thing might organically tend towards a centralized entity, and the community has to be cautious and wary of that and ready to take action if need be to ensure that the community remains decentralized via forking. And this brings me on to the point of forking, right? So Saylor's saying things like, "Oh, Bitcoin is never going to fork, therefore it's a commodity. Anything else that can fork is a security." Well, there's a couple of things here, right? Yeah, okay. If you've got a venture capital, if you've got a pre-seed and an ICO, if you've got a company, a CEO, and a dev team that are all reporting through that and paid through that ecosystem, and you're constantly forking, I get your point. But that's not the point on Hive. That's not what Hive is, right? And there's several other chains that aren't like that as well. I think the guy needs to give credit. And let me explain why, right? So on Hive, that like you're just saying, Dan, there's no venture capital, there's no ICO, no company, no CEO, no pre-seed. There's just a community of people not connected to any entity, and they're just working open source, right? Then the question is, why then go on to fork? Bitcoin is a panzer tank, right? Bitcoin doesn't need to be forked anywhere near as often, if ever, because it's just a panzer tank. It just is security, right? Great, that's good for savings. It's good for savings. It's good for guaranteeing the right for transaction, right? But when you're talking about things like social media and other things, let me explain a couple of really important forks that happen on Hive that were essential and make Hive better, right? And this is done not by a centralized entity. This is done by a decentralized community, and it's voted on by the witnesses, who are then in turn voted in by the community. So Hive was originally Steem. It defended itself against the Justin Sun takeover and successfully via a fork. So the community was able to say, okay, there's this non-benevolent rich guy who's taken over the community and is now dictating to the community what he wants to do. The community is giving him the middle finger and saying, see you later. And they're leaving. They have the ability to fork and leave. So they left the old chain, Steem, empty, with Justin Sun holding all the bags and no chain. And they moved to the new chain where they zeroed his balances and moved his balance into a DAO. And now the community self-funds via the DAO, right? That's one reason to have a fork. Another couple of things that happen in forks that make Hive superior. So you can hold these abusive whales to account. You can power up your funds in order to vote, and you have a 3-month power down, which stops the exchanges from using custodial funds to vote themselves in as block producers or witnesses. Right? This is essential, the 3-month power down. That's why they can't do it. And then the other thing, on vote, you're
a bit choppy.
All right. Well, just to say, you have to power up. You can't vote for a month. These things were put in via fork to make what happened on Steem impossible on Hive, right? And this is why you need to have the ability to fork. The nature of the underlying chain and the protocol stays the same, but the security elements that you add on top improve over time, and the forks allow you to do those things. And now Hive is just like, as far as I can see, it's basically as indestructible as they come. It's been through everything. It's forked everything in that it needed to fork to secure itself, and boom. So I flat out disagree with everything that Saylor was saying to do with not forking. And then on top of that, there is no entity to sue. There's no entity to go after. So there's a company called Hive Blockchain Technologies, right? There are mining companies listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And when Hive took the name Hive, they tried to sue. They issued a cease and desist. But then they found out there is no entity to issue the cease and desist to. There's no one to go after. And even if they took the top coin holder or the top 5 coin holders, there's still everybody else behind them. What they're going to do, arrest every single member of the whole community? They can't, because half of them are anonymous. So it's outside the realms of regulation, And I just flat out disagree with a lot of things that he was saying there.